And we are back for yet another week of Vin and Dave's Destination Unknown. We've got rain, not there, party on the other side of the woods, perhaps there. But I think it's appropriate for our topic tonight, because our topic has engendered quite a bit of hoopla in the last several thousand years. We're going to talk about alchemy tonight. How are you doing tonight, sir?
I'm doing awesome. How are you doing?
I'm good. I can't complain. Yeah, I had a good week. We are back on the carnivore, although we have had some people, I have to let you know, we have had some people reach out, and it looks like we will be receiving some generous donations of wine for future shows. So thank you to everybody who is going to contribute to that. And anybody who wants to do that, show@vinarmani.com. We red wines, what have we said? Cabs, we like Tempranillo.
Yep.
We got from a listener, viewer, if
like
you will.
Bold wines,
Bold.
Like a nice, Zinfandel. Be really nice.
Well, we're willing to explore, and if you have a wine that you like or a winery that you would like to introduce us to, so that then we can introduce the people who are listening and watching to it. I guess that's right. And I have not even started it on the wine, so this is going to be.
That is the problem.
Yeah, this is going to perhaps I get more articulate as the wine goes on. So, where should we start? Alchemy. This is a topic that a lot of people don't know very much about. Do you want to? Well, why don't we do this? Why don't you give your sort of definition or understanding or basis for alchemy, and then I'll give mine, and we'll see how close we are on these two.
Well, going by history, I think we're probably going to match up pretty good.
Okay, well, let's give it a shot.
So I think the mistake that people make, even people that write about alchemy, I think they get caught up on the materialistic aspects of it, right? Like, so one of the goals, if you will, of alchemy is chrysopoeia. I guess chrysopoeia. Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Like a chrysalis, right? Like transforming.
Metamorphosis.
There you go. So it's literally to make gold. So the word means to make gold.
Okay.
And I think when people think of alchemy and alchemists, that's what they think. They think these, dudes in a robe in a laboratory with all these, weird chemicals, and their whole goal in life is just to like transmute lead into gold. But that is not at all what alchemy is about. And if alchemy was just about that, we wouldn't have literally some of the greatest minds in history that devoted significant effort into researching it. I mean, one of my favorites, I spent, tons and tons of effort. And why am I like, this is one of those days where you just like you draw a blank.
You go on. Yes. I've you know what? I've been having that with, and maybe it's the topic of alchemy, but I actually had that earlier on as I was thinking about the show today, and I was like, going sort of down the line of historical people that I might want to talk about, and I was reaching people where I was like, wait a minute. I know who this person is. Like, wait, no, I know this person's name. I know it well. Like, why can't I think of it? What's going on with that? And I wonder if that's not just coincidence. I wonder if that's synchronicity.
Could be.
I mean, it's a powerful topic. I'm sorry to interrupt you. Continue on.
It is an extremely powerful topic. And so, I mean, specifically, Isaac Newton wrote over 1 million words dedicated to alchemy. If there was nothing to it, one of the greatest minds in history wouldn't have written so much about it. Carl Jung wrote a lot about alchemy.
A lot, yes, he did.
Bacon wrote tons about alchemy. He was an alchemist. He was active in trying to, ascertain the meaning behind it. And really, that's what it's about. It's a spiritual journey. Sure, there are physical components to the spiritual journey. So if we're looking at, transmuting base metals into gold or silver, or we're looking at, creating, some form of life, or, we're looking for a magic solvent. It's not magic. It's just a universal solvent that will, dissolve anything. These are physical goals, but I honestly believe that that was just part of how you had to achieve the spiritual enlightenment. Because I really think that alchemy wasn't so much about making gold or, doing these physical things as it was about achieving gnosis. I think that's really, at its fundamental level, what it was about. And interestingly enough, while I was, prepping for the show, there were a lot of concepts related to alchemy and alchemists and the history of alchemy that tied directly into the topics that we've already covered on the show. And, I'll definitely make callbacks to things we've already covered because it's all tied in together.
Well, yeah, we were talking about that before the show, and I think that, well, clearly, I mean, these are the things that we're interested in. I wonder if that's more a message about our own interests more than a message about alchemy itself. But and maybe, as these shows go on, I think that's one of the cool things about, like, I think in some ways you have to speak and you have to converse and you have to have discourse to really even know what it is that you yourself think.
For sure.
Right? That, like, you sort of, because you can only see your own mind, I often think, as a reflection of the discourse that you have with others. Like, there's no way to know who you are except through the mirror of the interaction with another person.
That's a great concept.
Yeah, I've always thought that was where it was at, and I think people, it's one thing that one way that I think I'm often misunderstood. I know I'm off on a tangent already, but I think it's one thing that people often misunderstand about me, because I think ask confrontational questions, and I always have, particularly of authority figures, whether that's a sort of like a positional authority or like a authority because of some sort of knowledge, right? Mm-hmm. And it's more that I'm trying to understand myself through even their answers and reactions, perhaps, to my questions, right? It's so, and I do think that there's something there in the alchemical that has always interested me, because And maybe that gets me to kind of how I've come to understand the concept of alchemy, is that it's something like, in the early days of trying to understand the world, there was astrology before there was astronomy. Mm-hmm. There was I don't know what you would call it, perhaps like folk medicine before we had this medicine, right? Like the old way, sort of like the traditional medicine, herbs and this. And it wasn't so much that you knew what was happening, but there was the basis of it was like, okay, here are these patterns. They do seem to keep occurring. You eat this and this happens. Mm-hmm. Then every culture kind of puts something on top of that. Right, so you had the early tracking of the stars that the Egyptians did, which we've talked about, very much astronomy. Mm-hmm. But then when you start asking, why is this happening? Yeah. And you don't have the answer, that's when it goes to the sort of the mystical, and you get the astrology. And then because there's those patterns, you attribute them to other things. Same with the folk medicine and the plant medicine and all of this, right? And I've always thought of alchemy as, like, alchemy is to the physical science of what I would call like non-organic chemistry, something that like started with metallurgy perhaps and then moved through, in the same way that astrology is to what we would call astronomy. But it's just that of all of those sort of pairings with the traditional medicine was even the last one. But this was kind of the first one that was pushed out by the materialist side, right? That the mastery of metal as a physical, empirical, experimental laboratory science was like, I mean, we're talking before Christ. Like, pretty much it gets kind of pushed out with steel working, right? So I kind of envision alchemy as coming up kind of in the Bronze Age, when they first start working metals. You're combining copper and tin together and you get bronze, and this is sort of the first time that they're like, ooh, metals. Like, they're like, ooh, what do we do with these? This is interesting. And then they take this bronze out and they just start kicking the ass of everybody who's seriously, of everybody who's Stone Age, right? Mm-hmm. So all these Bronze Age civilizations, and that was like, that starts in like Sumer and whatnot, like four millennia BC, maybe 3000 BC. And as you have this happening, of course, these individuals who are the first ones who are making metal tools they're trying to figure out, why does this, we don't understand this substance, this metal and all of this. And these are some very valuable individuals, right? They're like the first engineers. Even in Book of Genesis, Cain, I think it's only about 4 generations in that they're talking about artificers of brass. Mm-hmm. That this is a very important thing for civilization. Civilization needs water, fuel, and metal. That's basically that's what civilization needs to survive. And so I've always sort of viewed it as like, these are really the first people who are who have an economic self-interest to really inquire and experiment with the properties of the natural world, and that alchemy is the sort of is the gnosis that comes out of that. And then when it's replaced in the Iron Age, when the Bronze Age falls apart and sort of steel comes about and it becomes really about materialism, that there still is this knowledge of the craft that is now sort of in some ways divorced from the material aspect, and what becomes most important is the spiritual aspect. But then in later times, it's kind of what's in there is rediscovered and then reapplied in the physical world by people like, of course, there's Newton, but I think just right before him, who dies. We're talking like 1600 to 1700 is really it's funny because that's considered the end of the Renaissance and beginning of the Enlightenment, and it also coincides with the rediscovery, and it's really the Renaissance of alchemy. Mm-hmm. Is what the Enlightenment really is. But I'm specifically thinking about Kepler. Johannes Kepler, who, and we'll talk about the Philosopher's Stone, but literally the symbol of the Philosopher's Stone is his 3D representation of the universe, Kepler's 3D representation of how the orbits of the planets work and all of that. And it's strikingly strange that these people would draw on that. Or maybe it's not strange. I mean, you go back to it, but it's like, it's this weird thing where it's this forgotten knowledge that is thought to perhaps not pertain to the material world, that is then rediscovered, and it's seen, oh yeah, actually, this is how you decode the material world. So
it is. It's all about decoding the material world. It was the original science, mm-hmm. right? So, when I look at alchemy, and you take a look at the history, I mean, there's no clear, well-defined start date. Nobody, sat down and said, okay, I'm going to start doing alchemy. It grew organically out of a lot of the different evolving technologies of the time, like metallurgy, like you mentioned, mm-hmm. right? And also, medicine, botany. It was really kind of, it's not one thing, it's everything. And to me, it was like the original theory of everything. It's the mm-hmm. original attempt to understand the world in a deeper, more scientific way. Because if you look at the writings of the alchemists, they were measuring things, they were weighing things, they were trying to create repeatable experiments. They were really employing the scientific method before there was a scientific method.
Right, exactly, yes.
And they were doing this in order to understand their universe. They were, really doing what we would consider in some ways magic, but it was in an effort to understand their reality. You know, how do these things work? What are these things made of? A lot of the things that we take for granted, like white light is made up of a bunch of different colors, right? That wasn't discovered until an alchemist discovered it. And
you're saying like a prism.
Yeah. I mean, you run a light. Yep. You run a light through a prism, you get the multiple colors. And having the concept that things are made up of other things comes from alchemy. Air was thought to be just a homogeneous substance. It was just air. But, you know, through alchemy, we learned that it's not just air. It's a bunch of other gases, because they were curious. They investigated. They, applied fire. They split things apart. They put things back together. They like to break things down into their constituent components and then, recombine them in certain ways and, apply heat and apply, various acids. I mean, the whole idea that we have certain acids that react with certain metals and certain other substances to produce specific results comes from alchemy. Chelation and calcification, and there's an entire list of technologies that were discovered by alchemists that just became part of science. So much of alchemy just became part of science, and then science just kind of ignored the rest of it. It was like, okay, we're going to take all the good stuff that you did, but any of the, metaphysical or esoteric stuff, we're going to just kick it out. And that's what happened to Newton. Newton had written so much about the topic. So then when his, papers were collected, the entire volume of work that he did on alchemy was suppressed.
Now, is Newton's alchemy work before or after the the laws of physics, the calculus?
It was during. In fact, a lot of the work that he was doing in alchemy led to some of these other discoveries, like the motion of the planets and theory of gravity. So, I mean, think about it at the time. If someone came along and said, there is this invisible force that affects the movement of things in the sky, you would think that person was talking insanity. It's like,
I think if anybody stops and actually thinks about gravity, it's an insane concept.
Yeah, it's just like magnets, man. How the fuck do magnets work?
It's one that people, we say, oh yeah, I dropped this and it's gravity that makes it fall. You don't understand what the hell that is.
Nobody does.
You do not. The most brilliant minds that have ever lived have struggled to, when they're honest, would say they've struggled to wrap their heads around gravity. Yeah, the most brilliant minds ever.
The closest we have is it is a distortion of space-time.
Which means what?
Yeah, what is that? Like, tell me what that is. Gravity waves. Right? It's like, are you sure you detected gravity waves? Because you were waiting on two black holes to collide so that maybe you could detect gravity waves. I'm still not sold on it. Like the whole concept of gravity waves, not sold on it.
Because I'm not sold on it either.
If we're talking about an actual distortion of space-time, and space-time is looked at as the fabric of reality, the fabric of the universe, where are the waves, right? Like gravity, okay, so one of the weird things about gravity, right, is that there is no delay, right? Like everything is delayed by the speed of light. It takes the time, to interact with something else based on the speed of light.
But gravity doesn't move at the speed of light. It's instant, right?
It's instant. It is everywhere, always.
Right. So how could you have waves? Because waves require a peak and a trough across time. That's literally the definition of a wave.
Yep.
Requires the time, because intervals. Otherwise, it's not a wave. If there's no intervals, it's not a wave, and the only way to have intervals is to have time involved. So, well, there goes the gravity wave. Gone. Destroyed it right here. Right, you heard it here. I think that I think that that's the fact that science dismisses the spooky or mystical aspects that are in it even today says a lot.
Well, they dismiss the why, right?
And I think that, and that's what I was getting at with how you get from looking at the stars to, your horoscope. Mm-hmm. How you get from combining tin and copper to make a breastplate for a Sumerian king to the philosopher's stone, which to the creation of the philosopher's stone, which we'll get to. I think what I would like to do, and I don't. This may or may not be entertaining to you, but I think there's some value to kind of trying to imagine and walk through how you get from that. I mean, or at least if we could agree, would you agree that a likely origin for alchemy is probably in that beginning of the Bronze Age, which we're talking about the beginning of like Sumer, the beginning of these civilizations, where and that the sort of the fertile ground for that is the bronze smith trade, if you will. These guys who are the first people working with this new technology of metal alloys, and who are, without knowing that they're doing the scientific method, are discovering the experimental method themselves without articulating it, are certainly needing to embody it as they try to compete with each other to create the best. Well, at that time, what it would have been weaponry for the most part for the kings. So obviously, these guys are in super high demand. That they're maybe it's even coming from out of the priest class. Maybe some section of the priest class is doing this. Would you be willing to? Does that seem to make sense as a starting point for as the kernel of alchemy to you?
So let's do this. So the real origins. I looked into this quite a bit this week, and like I said, very difficult to pin down. There is no
mists of time.
Yeah, mists of time. And because it is, combining so many different areas of expertise, there's not really even a good definition of what it is. I mean, we're looking at it from, there's a physical component, there's a spiritual component, there's a mental component. There are all of these different factors that go into it. What I found really, really interesting was that around roughly the same time, there were three basically independent organic origins of alchemy.
Okay, what time are we talking about?
Consider
what would you say?
I would say the roots of it go back to about 3000 BC.
That's what I'm saying too. Yeah, that's where I think it's at. Yeah, beginning of the Bronze Age. Yes.
So roughly 3000 BC-ish.
Right. Yep.
Right. We have Egypt.
Yep.
We have India.
Yep.
And we have China.
Okay.
These three independent, geographically separated, culturally separated civilizations seem to have landed on, kind of a rough approximation of alchemy.
Now, are we sure that they are completely independent? That's, we've talked about this several times on the show already. Like, are we sure that these are completely independent civilizations, or is this a meme that's traveling through somehow? You know what I mean?
Sure. Given that my margin of error is probably 1,000 years, people could definitely travel between. And later on, when we really had the explosion of alchemy as a real science, was really in the time of Alexander the Great, because when he conquered Egypt and he set up Alexandria and the library and the university, that's where it really, really flourished. For a very long time, hundreds of years, before, of course, it was destroyed. And, there was a suppression of alchemical knowledge, a burning of the books. It was not a great time in history. But then there was a resurgence, like you said, during the Renaissance.
Well, right after, it seems to be the year 1600. Seems to be.
There was a lot of it that occurred in the 1500s, but I think though it took off, right? Because it was like, it was really, really popular during Alexander's time,
right?
And then it was suppressed, and then around. It still existed. Like there were still active practitioners all along, and the mystery schools, like we talked about last time, the preservation of that knowledge, that was all occurring all along the way. But then you're right, around 1600, it took back off again, and it's still going strong today.
Yeah.
Despite what modern scientists would have us believe, I think that there still is a lot of value in pursuing the research.
Now, would you agree that let's take a trip back to 3000 BC?
Sounds good.
And so we've got these individuals. We're starting to have division of labor as they start up in these city-states. These early civilizations in India, in China, in Egypt, which probably the borders of Egyptian culture probably extends into what is now Arabia, certainly up the Mediterranean.
Let's real quick.
Yes, go.
Let's talk about the name again. I think it's important to come back to.
Okay, so alchemy, it just means from Egypt.
Correct. And I also did some more research.
Go ahead.
So, Kemet.
Yes, Kemet.
And that is the ancient name of Egypt.
Yes.
What does it mean?
Doesn't it mean something about dark soil or something like that?
Yes, the Black Earth.
Black Earth, yes.
That's in Nile Valley, very fertile.
Right.
Black Earth. That's what it means. And so if you look at Kemet, which, that's where you get alchemy from, but it was really from the Black Earth.
From the Black Earth, which is metal. And
then that is also where you get the black arts.
The black arts, right. Right. Okay. Well, okay. So here's another interesting thing about it is that it's Alchemet. That's true. Kemet means the dark earth. Could it really just be talking about metal, though?
Well, actually, one of the stages of creating the Philosopher's Stone and actually working through, the great work, the Grand Arcana.
Should we just lay all this out beforehand? Because we've mentioned the Philosopher's Stone several times. It might just be useful to lay out the sort of the state of alchemy in the, I guess we could call it, in the modern age, and then maybe we could step back. So, like, I do want to step back to see, like, how does this evolve into where it's at. Yeah. But maybe if we could discuss, I think probably the great starting point is the Philosopher's Stone and the magnum opus, the great work.
Yep.
Because that is sort of where alchemy landed, if you will. Wherever it started, it seems that that's the great work is where alchemy landed.
Yes, and that wasn't always the case. The Philosopher's Stone, so Egyptian alchemy over 2,000-3,000 years evolved into Western alchemy. It went through the Islamic lands and eventually ended up in Spain and then in Europe. But the Philosopher's Stone itself wasn't necessarily always part of it. There was always the great work. And the Philosopher's Stone isn't even necessarily a stone. It has a lot of times it's described as a powder. But in essence, it would transmute metals into gold or silver. It would transmute, lower quality gemstones into high quality gemstones. If you drank it or touched it or put it on your tongue, it would heal wounds. It would cure diseases. You could hold it on your body, put it in your mouth, put it under your armpit, apparently, and fly. It would literally provide just about anything you wanted to do. And it was really seen as, and that's what kind of leads me to this, wasn't I think there's a physical component, because I do think that some of these things actually took place in history. There's enough documentation where, people made every effort to prevent fraudulent, some magician coming in and going, oh, look, I made gold and it was a total trick. There were a lot of efforts made to disprove this, and there were a few, quote unquote scientists who didn't believe it at all, and then had a mysterious visitor that would come in and say, you're on the wrong track, let me help you out, would do a demonstration, or in one case, literally just left a tiny bit of the powder with the scientist and said, do your own experiment, I'll see you later. Left. The scientist actually took the tiny bit of powder, put it in some mercury, the mercury became gold. The entire experiment was under his control, not, the visitor had left. So I think there is a physical component to it, but that's not the important part, if you will. The Philosopher's Stone, I think, really became the focus because, when you're talking about somebody who can make gold, I mean, that's pretty sexy. That's like, let's focus on that. But the alchemists that were serious about their work, that was just a means to an end. It's like, yes, they had to learn how to transmute metals because that was going to lead to something else. And in the meantime, they could fund their work.
And what is that something else?
The spiritual development, the transmutation of the human form into a spiritual form. Mm-hmm. So the direct, etherealization of your physical body into a perfect spiritual being that would, transcend the physical reality.
So this is, and so then now I think is an appropriate time to go back, right? So 3000 BC, we know that there's a priest class.
Oh yeah.
We have to assume, just because of the simple facts of division of labor, right? There's not it's not like today where people have a lot of free time on their hands. 99% of people are working themselves pretty hard, or are being worked, like as we talked about in the case of Egypt during the flood, are being worked because that's what you do. Mm-hmm. You work, and in some ways that work within a city-state is a lot better than being out and having to hunt for your food and do all of this. But you're grinding it out. You're grinding it, right? You're grinding it out. And so but you do have a class that has the free time to be able to explore, experiment. We have a lot more of that today. But at that time, you have just a single class. That's pretty much the priest class. And honestly, that's pretty much what they do. It's what they're doing. It's how they have the hierarchy within their own class is, have you discovered something? Have you done this? Kind of how academia is nowadays. That's pretty much our modern priest class in many ways. Mm-hmm. You've got them starting out, making this metal. It's obviously quite valuable in terms of battle implements. I mean, it's the first person who makes bronze and outfits an army with bronze, unstoppable. I mean, it's a juggernaut. There's nothing you could do. You're fighting against people with wood and stone weapons, and you've got a metal weapon that's just chopping them to bits, right? There's nothing that they can do. And so these guys are very valuable. They're working on this, but they also have this sort of priestly background. And then when you start to ask why, and I think that's something that anybody who finds success in their life at some point has to ask, why me, right? Why me? And just why in general? Why is all of this happening in the world in general? Why am I seeing this pattern? Why is this happening? And you don't have a why, but I think when you go internally, so I could see one of these guys, and I could see him perhaps training up an apprentice. And the apprentice, of course, asking, well, why does this happen? And the answer fundamentally being over time, since you don't have the answer. I think when you don't have the answer, the best answer is because doing this will make you a better person.
Mm-hmm.
Because doing this and learning this and moving this thing forward at every step makes you more conscious, more aware, makes you understand the world more than you did before. And that's the real goal here.
Right, because it teaches you abstraction and metaphor
Yes.
and analogy, right? So you start to apply the same learnings to different topics, and you're like, oh, well, and that's where the as above, so below, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the duality
Yes.
of, the yin and the yang, and, all these things where it's like, if we can take this and do this to it, what if we did the same thing over here? Couldn't we also do this over here and make the same changes, achieve the same results? So by going through, and this is how you bring in the initiates, right? You teach them the basic lessons, and the ones who are capable of abstract thought and applying those lessons to other topics are the ones that move forward. And it goes back to the IQ test, right?
Mm-hmm,
It's like we are selecting the best of the best, so that way we can have the next priest class. Because the priests really, and you're absolutely right about the priest class, they were the only ones with educations.
Right.
They were the only ones capable of doing the work and figuring the things out, because they were the only ones that knew how to write. They were the only ones that were taught things. They had the skills and the ability to pass on knowledge and, think in abstract ways. Like, there was no reason for a day laborer or a manual laborer to think in abstract ways.
And I mean, I think we take for granted a lot of things. I mean, speech is a technology.
It
is. And as far as we know, human beings have been on the planet for 200,000 years, but we've only been speaking in like sentences for maybe 30,000. It's like most of the human experience, like Homo sapiens, just like us, most of our human ancestors could not even speak a sentence. Never mind writing. Mm-hmm. Because we're talking about at the same time writing coming up for the very first time. And we take these things for granted because they're just here. But I think it's probably in the same way that like a child who's born today, there's plenty of 2-year-olds out there, 1-year-olds even, who can work an iPad and an iPhone, and it's just like they will. For them, it's just normal that all of this stuff is just there, and they can work it. Whereas their parents remember a time when none of that stuff even existed, and I think that when we look back to this, we have to look back at a time where not only were these people on the cutting edge within their own generations constantly, but no one else around them was even capable of the first inkling
mm-hmm.
of this. Like the first inkling of writing, the first inkling of reading, the first inkling of anything approaching an experimental scientific method, of any of these things are just completely outside of the capabilities of any other human being that they're around. And I think it's important as we look at this knowledge moving through and we talk about this IQ test of just how crucial these sorts of, bringing in these initiates and just how value and what you're bringing them into. Like, you're bringing them into something that is like, I mean, of course it's secret. Like, you can't just bring somebody in that would mess it up because there's it's a lot of it's oral knowledge. If you screw up with this generation of initiates, you may just destroy the work that's been passed down for hundreds of, at least tens of generations before you. You could screw it up by picking the wrong apprentice.
Yeah.
And it would be lost forever.
Yep. Because if they do it wrong and then the bad knowledge gets passed along,
right.
That's where things really go wrong. Think about this. In Egypt, they were actually doing, they were alloying metals, and they had a formalized, systematic medical system by 3000 BC. This is 2,500 years before Hippocrates. So we're saying the father of medicine, Hippocrates, 2,500 years before him, they were doing triage. They had this formalized system of, and it was documented. I mean, they would train their, their new doctors, in like, if a patient comes in and these are the symptoms, right? There were 3 responses, and this is what blew my mind, right? The first one is the patient has an ailment which I will treat. The second response was an ailment with which I will contend, right? So I'm not sure if I can treat it, but I'm going to give it a shot. And a third is an ailment not to be treated.
Just let them die.
Let them die because they're too far gone, right?
Right.
They were doing...
That's triage.
That is triage. That is the definition of triage.
Yeah.
They were doing it, 2,500 years before the person that we think was the father of medicine.
Right.
Egypt was so far ahead in every measure.
See, now what I wonder is if really what happened was you had this concentration of knowledge, and what we're witnessing now, or perhaps I don't know if we're witnessing it now or not. I'm not sure. Perhaps it's just that there are more people and we're better connected. Perhaps it's that because, there's people listening to the show, and for some people, this show is way beyond anything that they would even find entertaining. And for some people, this is right in their wheelhouse. And I think that that's exactly what it is that we're talking about, that has always existed. But when you're in a society where there's like 10,000 people available for you to interact with, possible, or even 100,000, the number of people it's going to make sense to impart this knowledge to, because 1, they'll value it, and 2, they'll pursue it for the rest of their life and actually carry it on, because that's what you're really looking for in an apprentice, right? That's Absolutely. What you're really looking for in the initiates. You're looking to see, am I going to train this person, and are they going to take off? Are they going to become an alcoholic, like too much wine, kill themselves? Are they gonna decide they want to go off to war, or is some woman gonna pull them away? It's like all of these things that you've got to contend with, because it's not just like I can write a blog and put all this up on the internet and 1 million people can look at it and hopefully somebody will carry on the knowledge. It's like, if I pick wrong, perhaps this knowledge is lost forever.
And not only that, but, in addition to the risk of it being lost, it could be misused. Mm-hmm. And that was actually a huge concern of the alchemists. In fact, Newton was very concerned about that, about the misuse of the secrets.
Now, how would someone misuse? What would be an example of misuse?
Well, at the time, you could really crash an economy by throwing in a few tons of gold.
Right. Now, did Newton believe that he could actually transmute metals into gold?
Absolutely.
Newton really thought he could do that.
He thought that it was a real thing.
But he didn't say he could do it, but he thought, okay.
So here's the funny thing about that.
Okay.
He never said he could do it.
But if you could, would you?
If you could do it, would you tell anybody?
Right, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, no. And he actually, he told people, he's like, if you were going to pursue this line of research, you must keep the secrets, because there are secrets, and he was talking about secrets far beyond the transmutation of metals. He said there are secrets that must be kept no matter what. And there throughout history have been alchemists who have been captured and tortured by the church for their secrets and refuse to give them up. And if we're just talking about...
Why do you think that is? That's a really I find that fascinating. The skeptic in me says, well, they didn't have any secrets. That's what the skeptic in me says. The skeptic in me says they were tortured. People talk when they're tortured. If these guys didn't give up any secrets, then they didn't have any secrets, and their claim to have secrets was merely self-aggrandizement. But there's a little piece of me, the little skeptic of the skeptic who says, no, actually, there is some knowledge that you can possess that is so terrifying that you literally would endure any pain unto death rather than to give it to somebody who might unleash it on others.
Yeah, Jack Bauer dealt with that all the time in 24, man. He was...
The nuclear launch codes.
Yeah.
Right? Well, that's kind of it, isn't it?
That's exactly it.
And that's what the skeptic of the skeptic says, that it's like, oh, no, it's the nuclear launch codes. Of course it's the nuclear launch codes, to where it's like, I guess I'm going to suffer terribly, and I guess I'm probably going to die.
Yep.
Because I'm not giving up the nuclear launch codes. Like, that's too... Whatever pain it is that I'm going to endure is well worth the billions that don't have to endure such pain.
Exactly. And that's, I agree. I mean, my first thought on that was, well, maybe the guy didn't have anything to say. He didn't have any secrets to give up. But when you look at the story, the one I'm thinking of in particular, the guy was a well-known alchemist, and he was invited to, like, he had been all over Europe, various leaders and, princes and kings. And
now that was a thing for about 100 years.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it was a big deal to have an alchemist in your court.
Well, and even an alchemist just to come by and like give you some advice, or,
right.
Put on a demonstration or instruct your own people in the arts, right? So yeah, I mean, being an alchemist and actually being good at it could be a pretty lucrative career if you were in it for the money. But a lot of the alchemists were not in it for the money. They were in it for the art and for, the betterment of mankind. In fact, they would seek out specific people who they felt, like you were saying just a few minutes ago, who they felt would carry on the craft in the right way. So when they were invited in, they would use that as an opportunity to kind of like, suss out the court and see, okay, well, that person's okay. I could probably deal with them. And then they would follow up with them later, maybe bring them on as an apprentice, maybe, just have correspondence with them, whatever. But, that was an opportunity for them to see where the talent was and maybe recruit some new talent. This one in particular,
wine. Are we wine? Are we doing?
Oh
wine?
yeah.
While you're telling this, you can continue to tell the story.
Yeah. So,
thank you, sir.
This one guy I'm thinking of in particular, I didn't write down his name. I'll bring it in. So he had accepted, and he didn't want to do this. Like, his wife talked him into it. His wife's like, no, we should go talk to this prince dude. And he's
Let's
like,
go talk to the prince.
Yeah, and he's like, no, he seems like a douche. I don't want to go talk to him. And she's like, cajoling him into talking to the guy. So he goes. He is convinced to put on a demonstration of transmutation of metals. He converts, I think it was mercury into gold. And the prince is like, great, tell me how to do that. And he's like, no. And he's like, okay, you're going to prison. So the prince puts him in prison. He's like, for 2 years, he's kept in prison. He's tortured. He won't give up the secrets. And then one of his apprentices, one of his people that he had trained in the past, comes in and breaks him out, like in secret, gets in, breaks him out, and then they go off and, he continues doing his alchemy. So to me, that's more of a story of somebody who got themselves into a bad situation, survived it, and then went back to what he was doing before,
Well, what I figure with that one is, so let's say that he does have, there's only two options there, right? There's only two options. One, he didn't transmute the mercury into gold, and therefore all he could show this guy was a parlor trick, which would essentially mean, oh, you fooled me, now you're dead.
Mm-hmm.
Or he really could transmute mercury into gold. Well, as soon as he shows the guy, obviously he's going to kill him. So it's like, if you talk, you're dead.
Mm-hmm.
One way or the other, if you talk, you're dead. Which, in some ways, is like, even that in and of itself is an exercise in, well, that's game theory, certainly. But it is sort of this exercise in critical thinking and in a style of reasoning that it's formal logic, isn't it? And perhaps alchemy is the first reason from an economic standpoint for people to develop a system of formal logic. And formal logic in and of itself is obviously incredibly valuable in anything you're going to do in life.
Absolutely.
And so I want to go into, alchemy is basically what we really know of it is when it's rediscovered in this period that we're talking about, this sort of 1500s, but then explodes in the 1600s. We get into the 1700s with it. It's definitely part of the Enlightenment. We could say that this is when the mystery schools, the secret societies start coming back. I want to talk about the great work. Okay. I want to talk about what this, obviously it's sort of like the philosopher's stone, as you described it, clearly is an ideal. It's this, in metaphoric form, it's really a matter of the alchemist, right? That it's like the ideal alchemist can make the ideal substance. It's when you've achieved the highest level of knowledge that it's almost a promise, right? It's a promise that if you will stick this out, if you will pursue this to its bitter end, if you will devote yourself to what Miyamoto Musashi called the spirit of the thing itself, if you will forge yourself in that same flame, then you will be able to create at will this wondrous thing, this boon, right? That's like the hero's story. You will become the hero. And that process is the great work. So let's talk about that a little bit. Let's talk about what is the great work, this magnum opus.
So the great work is essentially, so traditionally it was always about turning base metals into gold, right? And this, philosopher's stone had that and other powers. It could do lots of things. But really I think it's about the learning about oneself. And I think that Jung actually talked about that, that aspect of it. So actually going through the discovery process, the decoding process, because unless you were an alchemist at the time when there were alchemists teaching other alchemists, you're pretty much trying to recreate this stuff from, bad translations in a lot of ways, original material that is completely indecipherable because it's encoded.
But that also meant that you would have to learn cryptography,
yeah,
other languages,
yep,
right. So it's like just to even begin to crack this book, you're going to have to learn an ancient language,
mm-hmm.
and then you're going to have to learn cipher codes, right? So you obviously even to start, you already become something superior to your peers.
Yeah, and you have to learn chemistry. You have to learn, botany. You have to learn not only the science of those things, but also what their nicknames were, because they would call things like the green lion. And it was actually not a lion. It was green, but it was not a lion. And you had to kind of know that they were referring to a specific combination of chemicals by the Green Lion. And getting that knowledge a lot of times was, practically impossible. There were people that succeeded. Probably the most well-known and, okay, so the Emerald Tablet.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Written by Hermes Trismegistus. Yep. Thrice greatest Hermes is what that translates to. So he was the first master of the 3 parts of the wisdom of the whole universe.
And what are the 3 parts?
So the 3 parts are alchemy, right? So that's the operation of the sun, interestingly enough. The sun also could be considered fire.
Fire, yes. So we've got 4 elements. The sun representing the fire element. Yep.
And fire was a huge part of alchemy. And that's how they, would combine, they would split apart the substances. They would recombine them. They would melt the metals. Fire was crucial to the entire operation. The second part of the wisdom of the whole universe is astrology.
Yes.
And that is the operation of the stars.
Got it.
The third is theurgy, and that is the operation of the gods. So these 3 things came together. And 3 is a number that came up a lot in the, just going through like initially and getting like an overview. So I wanted to have like just an overview of what alchemy was back in the day. And the number 3 just kept coming up over and over and over again. I thought it was really coincidental. Like, we had the 3 like origins of alchemy across the world. Even within, that like within India, right? So in India, there were 2 names for alchemy. There was Rasasastra, which is the science of mercury, and Rasayana, which is the path of essence.
So these are the sort of the physical and the material and the immaterial sides of the practice, as we've been discussing. Right?
Yep, and which goes back to the duality, the yin and the yang, concept. Yes. And the 3 doshas, Vata, Pitta, and Kapha.
Right.
Vata characterized by the properties of dry, cold, light. And the opposite of that, and each one of these had their opposite, which was awesome. Prana is our life force. Yep. That would be the opposite of Vata. Pitta represents...
That's fire, right?
Actually...
Or heat.
Let's see. Pitta represents metabolism and characterized by heat.
Yep.
And... And Tejas. Tejas is our inner radiance and is the healing energy of Pitta. Kapha is the watery element, and Ojas is the ultimate energy reserve of the body, which is derived from Kapha. So,
and this is what is used in Vedic medicine, that you're trying to get an equilibrium between all of these. So, like, when I first encountered these was actually a friend of mine's mother who was looking at my girlfriend at the time's skin and said, "Oh, you're very pitta. You're very pitta," because she would break out and whatnot. And she said, "Oh, you need to do this, and this." And it's like, it's basically this. Again, it's kind of it has that alchemical feeling to it, to where it's like you recognize these patterns. And then seeing these patterns over and over and over and experimenting, you say, oh, well, that must be like a fire thing. And then here are these water things. But it just so turns out that when you do the sort of Western hard science on it, then you can see why these things interact in this way. But it's just as useful to the average human being to be like, because the question is, do I really care why, or do I care that whatever ails me is cured?
Well, that's really the bottom line, right? It's like does it work?
Like, does someone care? Do the people checking this out on YouTube right now really, really care about the audio and video codecs and how they work to turn light how these digital cameras, turn photons into ones and zeros and stream them. Do they really care, or do they just care that the signal, that the video and audio is coming through strong to them so that they can check out Destination Unknown?
I would say that our audience probably does care a lot about that stuff because they are really wicked smart.
Right.
But I would say most people don't.
Right. Well, I would say even the wicked smart people, most of the time, in most of their interactions, just want shit to work.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, I know a lot about a lot of the things that I just mentioned. However, most of the time, I just want it to work.
Yeah.
Like, I have built back ends for streaming video platforms, and yet when I sit down to watch Netflix, I don't want to think about any of that. I want to click a button, I want it to play, and I want to get lost in the story.
Yep.
And if the person on the other end could keep Netflix running perfectly well,
yeah,
but when I asked them how it works, they told me that there were all of these things coming in from the stars and that they were told, I'd be like, fine, dude. Fine. You get that. They were like, yeah, there's these little creatures that are running around. That makes it, actually, that works. That makes it work. It's working for me. We'll keep going with the creatures, dude. Like, that's fine. It seems to be working.
Sounds good.
And I wonder, though, could I say that is wrong? Like, can we actually say that the alchemical reasons that made these things work, can we actually claim that they're wrong if it actually served to make it work?
No, because we have scientific proof that computers don't work the way that people tell us they do.
Right.
Everybody knows that computers work on magic blue smoke. And if the magic blue smoke ever comes out of the computer, it will never work again.
Right.
Everybody knows this.
This is true.
That's hard science.
But this is back again to my Age of Magic idea.
Mm-hmm.
The approaching the new Age of Magic. I see, these characters showing up in these courts in 1600, right? After the Renaissance. You've got to imagine that for several hundred years, there's been a steady increase of human knowledge. And this idea that, at that point, I'm saying, this idea that, wow, there was so much in the past that clearly had value, because look at how far we've come rediscovering it. There's clearly so much more. And here is this individual, this alchemist, who has some of this knowledge. It's legit knowledge. He can explain where it comes from. He can do some demonstrations of some things. That's going to be very interesting. Very interesting. And I think that we are coming into a place now where we are rediscovering. I think that humanity travels in I did a whole thing on it. That's the Ascendant Project, right? The idea that we move in these cycles, and that sort of in every cycle we go back to a previous iteration of sort of where we are looking for knowledge. I think that's something that we're doing right now. I think that we are in a new enlightenment. I
agree.
I do believe that. I think that we are seeing a new. I think I'm going to say this, and I've said this publicly. Like, I think Bitcoin is the Philosopher's Stone. I think it's the Philosopher's Stone. Like, well, what is the Philosopher's Stone supposed to do? It's supposed to make gold out of nothing. That's kind of the idea, right? That you take something that's otherwise worthless and you turn it into gold. Well, what is Bitcoin then? What did Satoshi Nakamoto create? if not that. Because you go back at like, there's people who were the early people running this silly little Bitcoin client. Like you could go and type in Bitcoin 0.01 and look at the images, and you can see that it was like every 15 minutes, if you were one of those first people, 50 Bitcoin was dropping on you. You can see the screenshots from these early Bitcoin. You imagine. I mean, of course, a lot of those keys are lost.
Yeah, a lot of that stuff doesn't exist
anymore. A lot of it is just stuck on the blockchain and will never be able to be moved. But a lot of it has been moved.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of people who made a lot of money, and it's like you go back and you look at the code of the initial Bitcoin. I actually did it today because I was writing an article. Man, it's like there's like nothing there. It's a little dinky project, man. It's dinky. And I mean it's literally, the source code is like 15 files, and each of them is probably 200 lines each.
Wow.
It's nothing. Dropping what was at the time useless.
Mm-hmm. Until the pizza.
But to be able to so now it's like, even look, you imagine it at when it was at 10,000. I mean, it's at 6 now, but like put it at 10,000. Right? And it's like, then go look at those screenshots of people running that initial client in the first year, and it's like 50 Bitcoin, 15 minutes later, 50 Bitcoin. Imagine $500,000. That's $500,000 dropping on you every 15 minutes that you just left this thing open. If that's not the Philosopher's Stone, I don't know what is.
But the Philosopher's Stone only comes to those that have the foresight to see.
And these were people who were, again, who spoke many languages, because it's written in a language that most people don't speak. It's written in C. It's written in a computer language. And these were cypherpunks. These were people who were into codes, right? Which was one of the things that you would have to learn to be able to be an alchemist, because you were going to hide things in code. To me, we're coming into a time now where it's we can at least draw, I think, back to say there's an energy that's been on a cycle that's coming back. This is the evidence of that energy, and there's great knowledge to be drawn from going back to the past, going back to alchemy, and to see perhaps it's not about, maybe you do want to. Maybe you do want to learn how to program. Maybe you do want to go and start writing within the Bitcoin protocol. Maybe you do want to do those things. Or maybe you just want to learn how to make yourself better because the energy is right for that right now. I think that's where we're at.
Yeah.
This is my New Age of Magic thesis. Okay, so we're in. Let's go ahead.
No. I was just gonna say, I definitely think that we are primed for an awakening and an acceptance that we've not had the opportunity to have. In my lifetime. I think it's all the potential is there. I hope we see it through.
So let's go. So let's try to draw back to the last time, because I do think that the last time that this happened was 1600, 1700, and we know sort of what came from 1600 to 1800. I think everybody would agree that period of time, everything changed. Everything in terms of all of human knowledge changed, and we can I think chalk that up to this rediscovery of alchemy. So I don't know if we talked about it. Were we talking about this on the show? Kepler, was that before? Yes.
Yeah, we were talking about that earlier.
Okay, so The symbol that's used to represent the philosopher's stone is a circle. On the outside of that circle is a square. On the outside of that square is a triangle, equilateral triangle. And around that, so basically how you have to picture this is the first circle, the square is around the circle in such a way that the four sort of cardinal points of the circle, if you could imagine this, since I'm trying to do this for people who are just listening, is they are touching the middle of each of the sides of the square. So it's like just draw a circle and then draw a square such that the square perfectly is around the circle and that the circle is touching at those 4 points. Then draw a triangle such that and these are all equilateral, and so you're drawing an equilateral triangle, meaning that all the sides are the same, such that right in the middle of the triangle, on the two sides that are coming down, the 2 points of the square are touching, and then it runs across the bottom of the square. And then draw a circle such that the 3 points of the triangle meet the circle. That's the philosopher's stone. But you've got, like, right around 1600 again, you've got Johannes Kepler, who's like considered one of the fathers of astronomy. And if you go into his all of his work, he's drawing back and he's using these same shapes, but in their three-dimensional Platonic forms, and he's saying that this is how the universe is set up. He's drawing back. He finds this. This is something that most people don't necessarily connect with this guy. And he's saying that this is a mark of God's influence on the world. This is the music of the spheres. He's talking about the harmonies in the universe. But yet it's got that alchemical connection. There's no way that his three-dimensional representation of the one-dimensional representation of the symbol used for the philosopher's stone is just a coincidence.
I don't think so, because you have basically anyone who was anyone in the educated, learned community would have been an alchemist at the time, right? Because that was the science of the day, right? I mean, there was no... it was a legit thing. Like, it's not considered legit today, but it is actually regaining some legitimacy.
Why do you think it's not considered legit today?
Well, I don't think people really understood it. I think once, I think there was a moving away from the why. We talked about this a little bit earlier, and we talked about it on one of the previous shows. Science got away from the why and focused on the what, to the point where they said that investigating the why is unscientific.
Right. Yes.
And it's like, it's not unscientific, right? Like, we should be able to ask why.
Well, I think even to ask, if you're not even going to ask why are you doing this, if you're not even willing to have that introspection, in my mind, that's where science gets corrupted.
Yeah.
Right? Because I think that in the modern times, certainly I think that's the conundrum that was raised with the splitting of the atom, if for nothing else. And that you have to ask, like, you had these brilliant minds. How do you know what it is that you're making?
Or why you're making it, or how it's going to be used.
Well, you know how it's going to be used.
They were fully aware.
You're in the middle of a war.
Yeah.
It's being funded by the military.
Yep.
You're being told to build a weapon. You know what you're building. You know how you're building it. How are you this brilliant individual? Perhaps it might be a little bit different for I'm thinking it's probably a little bit different for people at the time who are maybe young men who want to be heroes, or maybe like 20 years later, like the test pilots who are going to become like astronauts and stuff like that. Those guys are cowboys, right? And if you ask them why are they they're doing it for the thrill, man. But these guys, these scientists, you're like, it's almost like that was the moment where they had to stop asking why.
Well, they were literally some of the smartest people
that have ever lived,
And they knew what they were doing, and they regretted it. I mean, it wasn't like it was a guiltless thing. There's a particular quote I want to look up.
The Oppenheimer quote from the Bhagavad Gita.
And I have become death, that one?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, that is the thing, is like...
Now I have become as death, destroyer of worlds.
Yeah. He knew what he was doing.
But that's after he witnessed it. You have to think that it's complete ego to say, and this is what science has approached at this point. It's the same thing with these people who are researching and recombining the worst diseases that have ever existed.
Yeah.
And they have them in these, these highly secure, quote unquote, cold storage vaults. And you ask, like, why are you doing this? And the real answer is because I can. That's the real answer. If they're really honest, the real answer is because I can, and it makes me feel powerful. And I think that's what's at the core of the alchemical secrets, right? That's what's at the core is maybe it's something like perhaps you can choose to pursue this, and perhaps the secrecy is the most important part. It's like perhaps you can choose to pursue this, but you can never pursue this on behalf of someone else who is not an initiate, and you can never share this information with someone who is not an initiate. Otherwise, you become as death, destroyer of worlds. Because Oppenheimer didn't drop a bomb.
No. He just turned over the ability to drop a bomb onto people who, he enabled them to do things they were incapable of doing themselves. Completely.
And there you get to we go back to the discussion of the nuclear launch codes about what is it that would be worth suffering terrible torment if you had certain knowledge that you knew that you would give it up. And yet, here are the individuals, which to me, almost the fact that occurred, the fact that the people who knew how to split the atom split it and gave it to individuals who were already mass murderers, who had already ordered the death of tens, if not hundreds of thousands at that point, and were more than willing to do that. For what? Clearly not for money. They weren't highly talented scientists. They could have gone and made money in any industry, anywhere, at any time. For what? It had to be simply for ego. And so that's the idea of, no, there are some secrets that can never be shared, which almost says to me that, well, it must actually be real. Like, for Newton to say that, there must actually be some secrets, because it turns out there actually was a secret.
Yeah.
That we have empirical knowledge that this exact scenario laid out by these alchemists actually occurred, and a secret was misused and released in such a way that it literally threatened human existence itself.
You know what else you can achieve through nuclear science? The transmutation of metals.
You can actually create gold. Mm-hmm. It's a fake gold. You can create diamonds too.
No, you can create real gold. If you you can, with the application of what was it? It was but within a nuclear reactor. I mean, you can using the work that was actually done by Einstein and Oppenheimer and these guys, you can transmute one element into another element on the atomic level. So, I mean, it's not just, we're doing a magic trick. No, we can actually create new things. We're creating new elements, in the particle colliders. We are doing all sorts of, crazy things that were impossible.
So then I'm going to go someplace now. I'm going to go someplace. I'm going to go someplace. Going to tie it perhaps back to the crypto-terrestrials.
Okay.
This is where I'm going to go. I've said that this is, and I recognize and I do believe that our culture is in a constant state of rediscovery, and I think that this conversation shows that that's the case. We're trying to rediscover something that was, very popularly rediscovered 400 years ago, which was a rediscovery of something that was probably another period, and then certainly another period, and another period, and another period, back to as far back as we can take it into the mist of time, 3,000 years ago. But perhaps it's a remembering of an even previous time where the atom was split, where metals were transmuted, like we can do now. Perhaps we are rediscovering a past that has happened before, and that what's truly important, what's truly been trying to be passed on, is not necessarily the material knowledge, because the understanding is there that the material knowledge will always be rediscovered. The material knowledge can't keep hidden, because we always are in a pattern and we will always rediscover it. But what we can try to pass on is the spiritual and moral knowledge about what we do with the material knowledge when we encounter it. And the 40s were clearly a fail.
So that is a fantastic segue.
I'm known for that.
So I love that we went to the recurring theme, right? So, I mean, yes, it's entirely possible there was an ancient, more technologically advanced civilization, and we are trying in some way to preserve their knowledge. And we've talked on this show several times about, certain figures in history, certain artifacts that have come to light that were completely out of time, out of place. Certain people that just really didn't make sense, didn't really fit into, where they were. So let's talk a little bit about Hermes Trismegistus. I cannot get his name right. Oh my God.
It's either Trismegistus, Trimegestes. I've heard it in several different ways,
So we talked a little bit about, he was the first master of the three parts of the wisdom of the whole universe.
Yes.
Okay. So he is widely considered actually to be the founder of science, religion, mathematics, geometry.
Yes.
And his name is a combination of the Egyptian deity Thoth and the Greek deity Hermes. So that's awesome. He wrote a ton of stuff. Very little of it survived. One of the things was the Emerald Tablet, which was actually translated by Newton. So the Emerald Tablet, not necessarily made of emerald, the jewel, but it was green. And this is important because...
Is it a tablet or is it just a document?
It was a tablet. It was actually like a physical, hunk of stone tablet.
Okay.
And the reason that's important is because the inscriptions were in bas relief. So the letters stood up from the surface.
Oh.
Which is not possible to carve into a fragile, brittle, gemstone type surface.
You have to press it on somehow? You have to melt it?
Yes. So the theory is that he actually melted, and this was like his proof, right? Like he documented, like this is how you do the thing, and to prove it, this thing is made
Here's the thing.
In that way.
Right.
So
this is how you do the thing, and here's the thing.
Yep. And it's like, oh, because you could read a document and go, oh, that's not possible. Can't do that. But then if you're actually looking at a stone tablet that's been done,
that's the proof.
It's like, holy crap, right? So the letters actually stood above the surface, and so the belief is that he actually had liquefied whatever this green material was and poured it into a mold, let it harden, popped it out.
There you
go, emerald tablet. Now it was apparently originally in Phoenician, but it had been translated into Latin and Arabic. And Isaac Newton actually did his own translation because he didn't trust other translations. And you can find this online. It's very easy to find. I do have it here if we want to read it, but we don't need to do that. So the tablet actually contained the secret of the prima materia and its transmutation. So here's how you create the fundamental matter, right? The God particle, if you will. Mm-hmm. And then here's how you transmute it into other things. And as proof, I give you this tablet that was at one time transmuted into a liquid and back to a solid, even though it's, a stone tablet. So that was studied and translated by Isaac Newton. Like I said, it actually contains the phrase where as above, so below came from. And the theory is, okay, maybe this guy was not a real person. Like we were talking about Moses, right? Mm-hmm. Like, was he a real person? Was he one person? Was he an amalgamation of multiple people? So the thinking in general is that this guy was actually an amalgam of multiple historical and mythological figures. And Thoth, like we talked about.
But there's an actual tablet, though.
Yes. And we're not sure where, okay, and the story of the finding of the tablet is interesting because apparently Alexander himself found the tablet in Hermes' grave. Like they found the grave of Hermes. They opened the tomb. They opened up the tomb, and he was actually like either sitting in a throne or laying on a pedestal thing. That's not clear, but he was holding this tablet in his hands. He was actually like holding this to his chest. So
see, what seems interesting about this story to me is in the Nazi lore that is the First Reich. The First Reich is Alexander the Great himself, and the idea that there's just such an interesting idea about this particular individual being a Macedonian, not a true Hellenistic Greek, but having been, as a member of the aristocracy, very powerful aristocracy, sort of the brutes, right? The brutes who had conquered Hellenistic Greece, his father Philip, that educated, of course, brought up the philosophers brought up to educate this boy, who then conquered the world. And you start to wonder, like, again, the why of why is this important? Are we not seeing the whispers of the alchemical tradition and a young man trying his hardest with everything that he has and the most powerful army in the world to try to uncover perhaps the secrets at that time? And the first Alexandria being in Egypt itself.
Yeah.
And the most important one. And his finest general winding up in control, Ptolemy winding up in control of that region, almost as a protector of those secrets.
And I think Ptolemy was actually into alchemy. I think he got into it.
Well, I guess to go back to it, it's you have all of these echoes again it's like, as I said, the 40s was a fail, right? The 40s was kind of the misuse of all of this. And the fact that the Third Reich was going again to try to, they went back to the same places, looking for the same artifacts. They're at the highest echelons of sort of the Nazi regime. They tried to bring back in a lot of the secret societies in a very twisted and inverted. Everything was inverted.
Yeah. It was a corruption of what was. They were looking for occult knowledge and power, and alchemy, and a lot of the things they were looking for really weren't about power. They were about knowledge.
Yes.
And they weren't seeking knowledge. They weren't seeking enlightenment. They weren't seeking spiritual development. They were seeking power. And
power over others, whereas
domination.
Whereas this knowledge is really power over self.
It's
domination of self.
Yeah, and not even domination, but just enhancement, right? Like purification and making yourself spiritual.
But the discipline that's required to achieve the status or the willingness or the worthiness, I should say, for the Philosopher's Stone to reveal itself to you. Mm-hmm. Like Miyamoto Musashi talking about the spirit of the thing itself, the world's greatest swordsman saying basically in essence the same thing. The idea that it's not about, for him, it's not about transmuting base metals to gold, but he's writing the Book of Five Rings after being in one-on-one duels with and killing in one-to-one, man-to-man combat the 60 greatest, basically eliminating all of the greatest masters out of all of Japan single-handedly. Wow. With no formal training, but having trained himself, and then saying, well, how does this happen? Like the world's greatest duelist, the world's greatest swordsman, to actually sit down and write the Book of Five Rings and to say, well, the spirit of the thing itself will reveal itself to you. Whatever that thing is, it has its own spirit. And I feel like that is echoed throughout alchemy. The idea that each of these metals has its own spirit, and that what you're really doing is you're communing with the spirit of the thing itself, and it changes you.
Yes.
As you change it changes you.
Absolutely correct. Absolutely 100%. That is the process. And it is not something you can learn in a book. You can get clues to how to do the things, but you have to do the things yourself, personally. You have to do the things. You have to walk the path. You have to earn the right to make the transformations. And it's all about, all right, I'm going to, transform this. And by doing that transformation, I myself am transformed, into the next higher state of being, or the next evolution, or, whatever it is that you're trying to get to. And the different phases, just of the process itself. Like there is.
Yeah, let's go into that.
Yeah. So, it's 5 pages today, by the way.
Oh, folks. Dude. Yeah.
It's, I was saying earlier, like I had to trim this down. Like alchemy is just too big. It's too big of a topic. I am going to do a little bit of personal alchemy though, and make some Christmas presents for everybody. Just
shit! It's gonna be nice. I'm into it.
All right,
the stages.
The stages: nigredo, which is a blackening or melanosis; albedo, which is a whitening or leucosis; citrinus, which is a yellowing or xanthosis; and rubedo, which is a reddening, purpling, or iosis. So these are the different stages that the various, so not only do the metals and the chemicals, like sulfur, for example, will go through these different phases. So, as you apply fire, as you apply acid, as you apply different things, as you break it down into its core components, and then as you recombine them, you go through these different stages. And this is also analogous to what happens to the alchemists themselves. So they go through each of these stages, and they are changed by the process. And so that way, when they come out on the other end and they've been through all the phases, then they are they've achieved the great work. The Grand Arcanum is complete at that point because they have been through the purification process and they have come out the other side as a new substance. So we've taken the base metal of the human being and we've transformed them into the noble metal of the noble being, the spiritual being, the higher being. So it's fascinating. It is absolutely fascinating. So getting back real quick to Hermes.
Yes, please.
Combination of historical and mythological people. Talked about Thoth. We talked about Hermes, also known as Mercury, coincidentally enough. Mercury is a huge part of alchemy.
Yes. Well, Mercury is, if you're working with metal, anybody who is exploring the like Conan, the what is it? The riddle of steel. The riddle of steel. No, but if you're exploring the mysteries of metal, there is no metal more mysterious than Mercury.
Mercury's the best. Absolutely.
Well, don't touch it with your bare hands.
Don't eat it.
Well, the other thing about it is that it is interesting that handling Mercury with your bare hands over time will make you go crazy.
A lot of it, yeah. I mean, so it depends, right? Like, if you've got really rugged blacksmith hands, I don't know
No
it's
problem.
necessarily going to go through that,
Right,
you know?
Right.
You got like the guys who would sing and that were eunuchs. If you got their hands, then yeah, it's going to go right through there.
See, so that in and of itself is interesting.
The castrati, that's what I was thinking of.
That is interesting to me because I don't know if I've ever told you this, but I guess how old was I at that time? I guess I was 21. I lived kind of as it's sort of a pseudo, I guess, monastic sort of like monk life in a dojo.
That's cool.
Studied Kyokushin karate as what's called a uchideshi, which is a live-in student. I'll have to tell the whole story sometime. Perhaps I've told this before on other things in public. Never the whole thing, but perhaps we'll get into that at some point. Where was I? Wait, where was I going with this? A lot of wine. We're
talking about permeability of the hands.
Yes. So part of the training of this particular style. So this is the style. If you want to see what this is about, you go online. You could look Kyokushin, which is Kyokushin, or you could just look up like Kumite. So basically, what you're doing.
Oh, dude, is this Bloodsport?
Well, it's what real Kumite is, right? So real Kumite is this.
Are you saying Jean-Claude Van Damme wasn't real?
Particular no. This is one of the things where truth is almost crazier than fiction.
It's usually
because what it is it is tournament style fighting. It's Japanese. It's karate. It's stand-up fighting. But so basically the rules are, if you go down, that's it. 3 minute rounds. You wear a gi so you can grab onto the other person, but it's stand-up fighting. You don't take them down, and you're there. No punches to the head. Kicks to the head are completely fine. No punches to the head, just because that would end the fight too early. But no pads, no nothing. And you just kind of go in. It's a lot of leg kicking, punches to the chest, all of that. So most of the training for this is simply hardening the body.
Yeah.
So
I can see that.
It's a lot of what's weird about it is, and what was weird about this training was, it's a lot less about being able to. Now, there are some guys who just have amazing kicks, and those are the guys who tend to be champions because they just knock everybody out with kicks to the head. Right,
yeah, but I was going to say, like, a good kick to the head is way worse than a punch.
If you can make it happen at that distance, that's the key. Like, what you have to be able to do to get your leg up that high to really have some force while this other person is coming at you full blast. The real thing with Kyokushin is, and why you never want to see one of these guys in a street fight, is these kicks to the leg. Like, that's pretty much what the crux of the art is, are these massively hard hold up a baseball bat, and that's what Kyokushin guys, that's like the demo. Like a Kyokushin black belt, you hold up a Louisville Slugger like this, and he just comes down with this kick that goes like this, boom, and that's basically like a kick to the thigh bone. Like, you see one of these guys in a street fight, and you get caught with one of those, you're basically dead. He just broke your leg. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And then he's just going to stomp on your head. So what you spend so much of the time actually literally so much of training is just standing in front of another guy, and then you just stand there while he kicks you in the leg at like half, like it's just like bam, bam, and then just the other one. But after a while, the nerves die. Mm-hmm. Muay Thai guys do the same thing, right? So like that's been a constant thing. Kyokushin versus Muay Thai. You can go on and you can watch. The styles are so similar, but what's similar about them is you spend almost all of your training pretty much hardening your body.
Got to work on your shields.
The whole thing, well, it's not even shield. It's just like that your body can take the amount of damage. And the amount of damage, like when I left the dojo, my entire hand was a callus on the top from doing push-ups on concrete, from just hitting things, hitting bags with no pads, no nothing, and it's just you become this whole like callus thing. And so to me, when you mention this, like, that's a very long way to get to this, but I guess maybe it's an interesting story. Maybe some people will be now YouTubing and seeing how crazy certain individuals in the world are. What it brings up to me is that it is almost like that scene from The Princess Bride, where the dread pirate Roberts has made himself immune to poison so that he can play this little game. That it's almost like, yeah, the uninitiated, you can let them come in and play around with these things for a while. The aristocratic, foppish guy and it's going to drive him crazy or kill him.
Yeah.
But you'll be just fine to let him do the things that you're doing because you knew beforehand that you first needed to become something in order to be able to even experience and to touch, in order to even begin work.
Yeah.
You had to become something new. That was Masoyama, who's the founder of the Kyokushin style. He would say that to fight 1 minute, you had to train 1,000 hours. It's like to even be able to fight 1 minute against someone who could actually fight in this style, you would need to train 1,000 hours.
And I think that's valid. That's very true. You know, and
that's alchemy.
It is, because if you are going to contend with the masters, you must be a master. Mm-hmm. You can't come in and be an amateur and, really start above your ability. If you're starting above your ability, you're going to get hurt. And I think that ultimately is what Keeping the Secret was all about, because no one was up to the controlling whatever the secret is. And, like, you had to be an initiated master. You had to be an adept at this stuff in order to understand the impact that it could have. And that's why the secret has been kept and will continue to be kept, because it's so dangerous that if it is in the wrong hands, it could be catastrophic. And so it's like giving a kid, a can of gasoline and a lighter. It's like, hey, go have fun, play in the street. You know what I mean? It's like, you wouldn't do that. That's just dumb. Why? Not because he's a bad kid, because he doesn't know the power that he's messing with.
Right.
That's the problem. And when you take somebody who doesn't know the power they're messing with, whether it is somebody who has not put in the 1,000 hours of training and they step in a ring, like I step in a ring with one of those guys, is going to take my head off.
Right.
Because I don't understand the power that I'm trying to contend with. And that's the problem. Yeah. And we end up with that a lot, like in the 40s with nuclear weapons. It's like they did the thing and they handed it off to lesser people.
I do see so many parallels now. I think that with Bitcoin, with cryptocurrency, I think that we have reached a point with a particular class of individuals, and you are a member of that class, and I am a member of that class. But these, as Frederick Brooks said, that all the way even back in the '60s, the recognition that, look, this thing that we do, this software thing, is the closest thing to the classical description of magic. We say a few magic words and something appears. And, we're seeing with Mark Zuckerberg being brought in front of Congress, and with the discussion of Russian hacking, and with all of these things, we see that...
So Mark Zuckerberg is describing what he does to people that think the internet is a bunch of tubes. Good.
But I think that we're seeing a repeat of that same idea, like you are tracking and storing information about individuals, you are categorizing them, you are doing all of this, and did you stop to ask yourself why? Did you stop at any point to ask yourself why? Or did you just say, well, we have the resources, and wouldn't it be interesting if we could X? Yeah. Wouldn't it be interesting if we could create a consumer profile for this individual that would tell us exactly how we should market to them to make them choose this particular brand of soap, except it could also make them choose this particular brand of president?
Yeah. I predict, official prediction, drum roll please.
Ooh, Dave Stradamus.
I know, Dave Stradamus. And this is not unique. People have made this prediction already. We're going to be saying the same thing about AI.
Oh yes.
In a couple of years.
Oh yes.
It's happening. Like
AI is the next splitting of the atom.
It is. It's the next nuclear bomb.
It is for sure, but in a much more subtle way. And I'm already seeing it. I mean, what I see. The apocalypse that I see is
the revelation, if you will.
The revelation. Well, this is the nightmare scenario, and I'm already seeing it play out. I recently saw this graph that someone had done, one of these, these network graphs of sort of networks of connections, and they had been looking at sort of Twitter connections, of social media connections, of people who lean right and lean left. And they had it colored in the blue and red. You were literally looking at, even though they were both using the Twitter platform, you were looking at two separate networks.
Wow.
That the connections that they were having, what they were actually seeing in terms of the content that was showing up in their feeds, and this extends out to YouTube. This extends out to all of this as we start to get these algorithms, that what you see is not what your neighbor sees. Like if I go to YouTube, the algorithms are getting so advanced, and it's merely in order to serve an attempt to serve me. And again, this is why you're not asking the why, you're just asking the can we. You're attempting to serve me exactly what I want to see based on my previous interests. But that drives me even more into a place where I believe that the world reflects what it is that I'm being served. It's a confirmation bias. And so what you have is you start to have individuals who are not living in the same world, because the information, it's not like back in the day when everybody got the same newspaper.
Yeah, or the same 3 television channels.
Exactly. So at least then I could choose to agree or disagree. I could think it was bullshit or not. But what I'm being served now, and what is just going to continue on as AI gets more powerful, is I will no longer think that that the world around me is bullshit, because all I'm being served are the things that I think are not bullshit.
It goes back to How to Serve Man.
Yes.
Remember that?
Yes.
Yeah. Turns out it's a cookbook. So I think AI is the downfall. It is absolutely, the nukes didn't kill us yet. AI will be, it'll be the end.
But I don't think it's in the way that anybody thinks it is. It's not, because it never is.
No, it never is. It will be far more subtle.
Yes. It will be that I simply don't know what the fuck is going on in the world. What I see as the potential cataclysm is that literally the AI starts, because we already have artificial intelligence starting to write news stories.
Yeah.
We already have it starting to create music, it's going to get so advanced that it will just create the world that it thinks we want to live in. It will look at, and it will literally just start creating whole individuals made from, it'll be catfishing us with romantic interests. It'll be doing all of these things, and it will create a world for us, literally a virtual reality inside the world that we are living in.
It's almost like you're talking about living in a hologram.
Wait a minute. Wait a minute. Wait, are you telling me that we started at Alchemy and we ended up in the holographic universe?
We did, and there's actually 2 paths that we could have taken here. And I'm going to real quick, I'm going to walk us real fast down the second path.
We've got 5 minutes.
5 minutes, I can totally do this. All right, so we were talking about Hermes Trismegistus, and Thoth, Hermes, Enoch is another person who is connected with this story, who could actually be contributing to the character, right? So
Enoch from Genesis.
Yes, the grandfather of Noah.
Yes.
He also became the archangel Metatron.
Interesting.
Moses. We spent 2 hours talking about Moses last week.
We did.
Moses is directly affiliated with Hermes Trismegistus. Akhenaten. I mean, this is like, name for name what we were going through last week. Nabu, who is a Babylonian god of writing and wisdom, keeper of the tablets of destiny, which I'm going to have to look up because that sounds awesome as hell. So Hermeticism is based on the writings of Hermes Trismegistus. What did Hermeticism actually teach? Monotheism.
Interesting.
Yes. So we have Moses, Akhenaten, Hermes Trismegistus, monotheism, referred to as the Aprissa Theologia is a doctrine that claims a true theology at the root of all religions that was given to man directly by God in antiquity. There was one religion, just like the story about one language that was then confused at the Tower of Babel. We have this story that there was actually one monotheistic religion that was given to man by God in prehistory and then lost its way later on. But part of alchemy is seeking that truth, that initial root story. Like, what is the root story? And that's what Jung was also looking at.
Yes.
Right? So he was looking at what are these archetypes that are shared and would lead us back to this root story. They refer to one transcendent God. It's referred to as the All. They say that the All is one.
The All-Father.
The All-Father, the All-Mother. It's androgynous. So it's just the All. And everything in the universe is within the mind of the All. Okay? The universe is completely a mental construct, and the mind of the adept can mold it and shape it.
So you just went holographic universe on us. Then you went, we are artificial intelligence inside the holographic universe who can program ourselves through the utility function of alchemy.
It's just like Neo stopping the bullets, man.
When you're ready, you won't have to.
That's right. You won't have to. It's like, oh my God, what do I do when Bitcoin's $1 million? Or how do I sell a Bitcoin when it's $1 million? Well, if Bitcoin's $1 million, you won't have to.
You won't have to.
Right. That's the whole, it's the same story. It's awesome. Yeah. Dude, this is, like, I didn't, like, make that up. That is actually what they teach.
See, and this is why I say this is a rediscovery. I don't think that it is a coincidence that there is an obsession at the moment with the ideas of the Enlightenment. There is an obsession throughout the culture. I don't think that it is a coincidence that Jordan Peterson is considered the preeminent intellectual in the Western world.
I have got to read some of his stuff. I am totally just in the dark.
Don't read. Maps of Meaning is behind, and 12 Rules for Life is milquetoast, watered down. What I would say is it's about watching. I would say his Maps of Meaning course from probably the 2017 Maps of Meaning course, which is online, and then the biblical lectures. That's what to watch. Okay. Then he's got the personality, psychology of personality. You can watch the personality lectures too. The most recent ones are the best. That's it. Like you get those, you get the whole thing, and it's like it's fucking good. Like, it's pretty good. But, and the whole, same thing with the intellectual dark web. The intellectual dark web is the renaissance of the Enlightenment. I don't think that it's a coincidence that freedom of speech, Second Amendment, that these things right now are the hot button issues. The issues of, in Western culture, we need to start looking at these things again. But yet what you and I are talking about is, so of course we should expect at that same time that we should also be seeing the rise of the esoteric again.
Yes, and we are. We absolutely are. And it has a legitimacy that it hasn't had before, because scientists are becoming very confused.
Yes.
When and we talked about this a couple weeks ago, when their quantum physics experiments are showing them that the world is not what they thought it was, and they have no other explanation than, I don't know, like, apparently things can travel faster than light, and the world doesn't actually exist. It's just a set of probabilities. Like, that is a mind-bending thing.
And maybe that's the topic for the next show, is to show all of these things. I think variable speed of light is a good jumping off point. Perhaps,
it is, and I've got to make that video with with the polarizers.
Well, let's do it.
I got to show you guys that.
I think that's next week.
All right, I'll buy a camera
because we are. I think we're done.
We're out of time.
It's 10:01.
This is an unbelievable topic, and I do think that if I were to summarize this entire thing in one sentence, it would be that what alchemy is a preservation of truths that were true 5,000 years ago. They were true 1,000 years ago. They're true today. They're going to be true 1,000 years from now. It's the preservation of these truths, and we just have to go through the cycle of forgetting and rediscovering and forgetting and rediscovering over and over and over again. And that's where we are right now. We are in a rediscovery phase, and alchemy's part of it. Physics is part of it. Going back and looking at our history and the Bible stories and the origins and all of the different things that we're pulling together, pulling in parts of the Ascendant Project, it is all interconnected, and we are at the cusp of a new renaissance, and it's either going to be awesome or we're all going to be killed by the AI. One or the other.
And on that, thank you, sir. Yet another great episode. I hope you all enjoyed it. We will see you again next week on Vin and Dave's Destination Unknown.
What happened?
Well, we're just gonna say goodbye then. No exit, because I just completely closed it out. That's the why.
Okay, wait.